All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, where we will be exploring one of our really fun new Spark guides, and we will be looking at engineering inquiry with DIY feeders. Really glad you could join us tonight. Excited to be back doing the webinars with everyone. Just a heads up, there will be a section coming up where you will be invited to use pencil or pen and paper to sketch out some possible designs. So if you can have those handy, that would be great. All right, let's jump right in. I know we're all probably pretty familiar with Zoom these days, but just in case we aren't, or you've been using a different platform, I want to go over a couple of recommendations. When I shared my screen with you, it probably went full screen for you too. I generally recommend that you exit full screen. That will allow you to dock the chat window to the side, and I will be asking folks to share their thoughts in the chat window several times tonight. And it also is a great place to share resources with each other and crowdsource some ideas while you're here as well. So to do that, you'll want to exit full screen, then find the speech bubble icon, click on that, and then over here where the chat window pops up, you'll see an area where you can enter texts, and above that should be a drop-down menu. For you, there should be an option that says to send to everyone, and that would be the best option to use to share ideas and have chats together. Of course, you can always message the panelists separately too. Just remember to switch back to everyone when you're ready. Okay, awesome. So I am coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. Doesn't look quite like that here today. We're still pretty chilly and we've got a little bit of snow on the ground, and the pond is iced in a bit still. But you can tell from the birds singing that spring is in the air. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm the outreach coordinator with the K-12 education team. So our mission here is to create innovative resources and deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through nature, participatory science, and inquiry. And I am joined in the chat window today by Susan Licker, and Susan is our learning coordinator, and she's going to be sharing links with you and fielding questions, flagging me down for questions I should answer and things like that. So definitely use Susan as a resource and get ready to copy paste some links. Actually, you don't have to do that because I will send out an email to everyone once the webinar is finished. And we will send the recording up on our YouTube channel, and I will send out that link along with all of the links that we mentioned in this webinar to you in a follow-up email. So you can sit back, relax, and enjoy. So today's webinar, we are going to give you a quick little introduction to Students as Scientists, which is our newest science unit and is what really inspired us to create these Spark guides for our for 4 different topics that help kind of get folks connected to nature and outside exploring and can be great inroads into inquiry. So we're going to talk a little bit about our Spark guides, and today we're going to focus specifically on our feeder design challenge guide. I will also share some links with you to other resources from around the lab to help you make the most of your feeders that you're going to design. And we'll also have the opportunity to discuss some potential adaptations and things as we go along. So first off, let's meet Students as Scientists. This is our latest science unit. It is a nature-based inquiry unit, so it uses nature as the inspiration to get students to ask and answer their own questions in science. So really, it's all about capturing that amazing ability nature has to inspire curiosity and figuring out how can we capture that curiosity and structure it into inquiry projects. So kids are getting amazing experience, hands-on experience with the science process, asking and answering their own questions. And as you can see that we have this guide is grade banded, so K5 and 612, and has age appropriate resources all inside each one. Comes with slides that you can download and use, as well as a lot of handout and resources. And we chose this time to do many of our resources as Google Docs and things so that you would be able to download them and adjust them and make them right for your setting and what you're doing. Each guide has 6 lessons in it and is available as a free download. So if you are interested in doing more with the inquiry process, going as far towards open inquiry as you can, I highly recommend these guides. Really excited to see them out in the wild now, and I hope that you will have the opportunity to make use of them. But we won't be focusing on these guides today. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction to them and share that they really do a great job of structuring the inquiry process. You can choose your timeline for how long you want to do these projects on, and this guide is really going to help you make that happen. But before you get into this amazing exploration of the science process, you got to get that spark, right? You got to get that excitement going. You got to ignite some curiosity. And that is where our spark guides come in. So we have 4 different guides in the works. 2 are available now. So we have our feeder design challenge and our wildlife cans guide. These guys are both available as a free download on our website. And their purpose is to offer some quick and easy activities that are going to spark your students' curiosity through the natural world. Each guide has activities in it that you can pick up and use, and they can be all you do with it is use this guide and you will have an amazing experience. But if you want to use it as an entry point into this inquiry-based science and as students, as scientists, as we've talked about, it's a great opportunity to do that as well. So today we are going to be focusing on the Feeder Design Challenge guide in specific. I love this guide. I love this activity. I've had the opportunity to do it with students as young as, oh gosh, what are daisies in Girl Scouts? Young kids and like 5-year-olds, all the way up to adults, and it's always a fun time. And I think you will find that it is enjoyable too. So in a minute, but not yet, we will be using pencils and paper. So if you want to go ahead and get those ready, now would be a good time. And while you're doing that, I want us to work together and brainstorm some ideas of like why would we use engineering and design as a way to connect to nature? So what are some things that come to mind? What are some connections you think of? And um, feel free to share whatever you come up with in the chat window. I love what I'm seeing. Okay, so some folks are calling out nest building, that birds all use design and engineering in their habitats. The design and engineering are exemplified in nature. Joanne is making the connection between birds and planes and how there's a specific term for it that's escaping me right now. It's not bioengineering, but um, when we are inspired by what we see in nature and it helps us design things that we use in our lives. So the shape of airplane wings resembles the shape of bird wings. Many animals build their own homes. Yeah. Biomimicry. Thank you. Thank you. There it is. Yeah, so I love where you're coming from, and I totally agree. I think that animals can be amazing engineers. As I was thinking about this webinar, I kept thinking about bees, and I found this amazing video of a wasp building a hive. It was too long to share, but if you ever want to like go on a rabbit hole on YouTube, just search wasp building nests, and it's kind of mesmerizing. So, yes, animals are engineers, but from a teacher perspective too, building up engineering practices, it goes hand in hand with building science practices and building critical thinking skills. And doing these hands-on engineering and design challenges are really fantastic ways to get kids experiencing the engineering practices as presented in the next generation science standards. Um, so it can be just a super fun entry point to this time of thinking too. And Tasha is mentioning that it's a great source of team building. Absolutely. So one of the things that I like to consider is how I approach teaching science because different folks are drawn into science for different ways. And there's been some studies that show different genders have a different affinity for aspects of science. And the Sci Girls, which was a PBS, not PBS, excuse me, it was Minnesota Public Broadcasting. They came up with a show, Side Girls, and one of the strategies that they come up with for approaching bringing more girls into science is having a collaborative nature. And so these challenges provide that kind of collaborative, exciting experience that can help build interest in all genders. Okay, and as you guys said, animals are engineers. And when I think of engineers and birds, I always think about, hmm, perhaps not.
Yes, we're hearing you now, but we lost you for a moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, have been having some computer problems, so flag me down. Is everybody seeing the video? Just
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I always find that video so charming. I'm always so impressed by how many pellets they use to make their nests and how neat it is and thinking about how they just are using their mouths and building these incredibly strong nest structures. So birds are absolutely engineers, animals are engineers, and we can take inspiration from them in our own creations. Oh, don't play again. Okay, there we go. So let's dive into this guide and talk a little bit more about what is contained in it. So, again, the purpose really is to introduce kids to birds and nature through an engineering and design challenge. The guide has several different sections. I've outlined them here for you. And I thought tonight we would actually go through the sections and kind of act as though we are going to be doing this activity. So you will have the opportunity to design a feeder. I gathered some materials and took pictures of it, so you'll have the opportunity to use your imagination. So let's jump right in with the first section, presenting the challenge. So in this guide, we present the challenge to students of designing a functional bird feeder using recyclable and found materials, what I affectionately call junk. Um, I have been known in the office as the trash panda because I am constantly gathering stuff for when we run these activities. But it can be something that people actually have a fun time gathering materials for you. They can be unconventional materials. I know a lot of folks have made like the soda bottle feeders before, but get weird stuff, get wacky stuff, an old shower caddy, clothes hangers, um, those aluminum foil baking tins. We have all sorts of materials we've had people use and come up with some just really fantastic and fun designs. We also like to put some parameters on the feeder building so that the students have something to focus on that shapes their thinking a little bit, and you have a basis to compare students to. So we like to have three main things that we typically do, but you can adjust them to be the best challenge for your students. Older students, you might add more or trickier parameters, for example. So typically we like to have the feeders designed to hang from a tree or a pole to hold about a cup of seed and withstand about a week out in the weather and use by birds. If you have fed birds before, there might be an bell going in the back of your head, like what about use by squirrels? Um, that is much more challenging to design for. So I think if you get squirrels coming to your feeders, you might have to give folks a pass on the durability there because squirrels are a constant challenge. So for the purpose of this challenge, we say the local weather and the birds for 1 week. The next step would be to observe how birds use feeders. So if you have a feeder at your school or you have access to um, bird cams online, it's a great idea to observe a feeder for 5 or 10 minutes and really have students think about what they're seeing. What parts of the bird's body are they using on the feeders? How are they using the feeders? How are they accessing the seed? What parts of the feeders do they see here? What are some of the different parts? So have them really thinking about how birds are moving and behaving and using these feeders, because you might have seen a bird on a feeder before, but you might not really have thought about it in those terms. So I have a short clip here from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's feeder cam, and we'll go ahead and play that and pay some attention to those different things that we talked about. All right. So now we had a chance to observe birds on the feeders. The next step would be to create a list of important feeder features. So reflect on our observations and think about some of the key bird feeder features. So I'm going to throw this out to you again in the chat window. Share something about what you noticed about how the birds use the feeders or what some important features are for feeders that you can think of. A place to perch. Yeah. Something easily accessible, somewhere to land. Whole peanuts are absolutely popular with blue jays. Yeah, some folks are noticing that there's different styles to bring in different birds, and that a lot of birds really prefer the wide open feeder. The woodpecker liked the cage perch rather than the horizontal bar. Yeah. Hmm. The cardinals were focusing on that front feeder rather than the ones to the sides. It's away from people. Jessica is noticing that some birds were eating different size of food. So the size of the hole and the size of the food was related to the size of the beak and what they could grab and carry away. That's a great observation too. Oh, Mary's bringing up rain protection for the food. The and saying that the open tray was popular, but rain could ruin the food. Nice. Oh, and Michelle's bringing up the cover aspect. I was thinking about the same thing. I was noticing the goldfinch was coming and the downy woodpecker kind of came into screen before they came onto the feeder and were hanging out in the bush and on the fence around. And again, lots of options to attract different types of birds. Absolutely. So if we were to distill this all down into a list of some things that we thought were important, I saw um, folks calling out that birds needed a place to perch, so they needed some place to land. They needed room to land. They needed a way to access the seed. So whether that was holes through wires on an open tray or the holes in the tube feeder. Some folks brought up the importance of protection from the elements, so a cover or something to help keep the seed dry. So those are all things that we would want to think about when we are thinking about designing a feeder. And remember that our criteria are that it should hold up to the weather in an area too. So that's a really great observation to highlight is that you might want some weather protection. And that might affect what type of materials you would choose to use in your feeder as well. Okay. So we've got some good ideas of what makes a good feeder. Now let's talk about the process of designing the feeder. This is a super fun process. I think it's great to have kids actually pause and stop and think about what they're going to build before they rush up to grab materials. That helps with material management, but also helps with actually building some engineering practices. So the first step to this would be to lay out the materials for students to have a look at so they can see what they are going to have available and outline your distribution system. I'll talk about some tips for distribution in a moment, just so they know what to expect and how many materials or how much materials they could expect to have available to them. This can be an activity depending on size, done solo or in teams, but I think it's a great team activity for that collaborative aspect we've talked about. And so encouraging your teams to design several different feeders is a great idea because they might not get the materials that they wanted first, but also it creates kind of a iterative process too. So create and generate a design, look at it, talk about it, make another one, and think about the pros and cons of each and kind of settle on what seems best or pick and pull parts from other ones. So, in a moment, you're going to have the opportunity to sketch out a couple different feeder designs, and I am going to encourage you to do more than one as well, just to kind of think about and feel out how this process would go. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about some of the tips and tricks that we've sussed out for distributing materials. You can have free for all, but that can feel a little uh, intense. But it's also fun to have some constraints to add some creative and critical thinking to how youth are approaching picking out their materials. So one approach you could take would be to categorize materials by size and then allow each group to get a certain number of each size of items. So you might have small, medium, large, and everybody can have one large and two mediums and three smalls or something like that, or an unlimited number of smalls, however you want to go about it. Or another way you could do it is to create a point system. So similarly, you sort the items, and that can be by size, or it can be by whatever criteria makes sense to you, and assign those materials different point values, and then each group would have a certain amount of points to spend. So they get to think about how they want to distribute those points, which can lead to some really creative designs if they choose to use a bunch of lower point items, for example. And you can run into some found challenges if somebody gets really excited and chooses all high point items, and then they realize, oh no, I don't have anything for purchase. So it can be a fun constraint to play with. So that's what I've laid out for us today. Hopefully you can see these images. I know some of these clear plastic items are difficult to see on the table that I had available, but I'll go through them in a minute. So on the left-hand picture, we have our 1 point items. So these are things like ribbon, string, some yarn, toilet paper tubes, a clip, chopsticks, um, did I say the lanyards? Yeah. So those are some options there. On the 2 point table, we have some clear plastic lids and containers that are of smaller size. And then we have some like of the little plant containers, little 4-person plant containers, some different lids, a coat hanger. And then on the 3 point table, we have larger plastic containers. We have a couple bottles. We have a mug, this container here, which has its lid still attached to it, and some large trays. So remember that our criteria is that it must hold 1 cup of seed, it must be able to hang from a tree or pole, and it should last for about a week outside in the elements. Um, and for the purpose of this thought experiment, you will have access to hot glue guns, different cutting implements, and lots of duct tape. So think about that when you are designing your projects. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes here to come up with one or two designs. I want you to think about while you're doing that the different things that we said make a good feeder, as well as think about how this would go with your students while you're doing it and any changes or things that you might do as well. So go ahead, you've got 5 minutes to come up with some creative designs. Feel free to ask questions in the chat window as you go along too. All right. Thanks for giving the 1 minute warning, Susan. My computer froze and I couldn't unmute myself. I was a little concerned there for a second. All right. So I also got a little wrapped up in my designs. So hopefully you took some time and sketched out a couple designs. I would love for you to share a little bit about your design process. So in the chat window, if you could share, did your thinking change much from your first design to your second design? Or was there a particular part that you found the hardest to conceptualize? Or some part that you felt was like really important to include in your design while you're thinking and typing? Um, I felt like maybe I gypped us with 8 points because I wanted more stuff. Um, the first design I did used the hanger and one of the aluminum trays upside down over one of the small plastic cups from the 2 point table. And then I got really worried about that being flimsy because, as Aaron's pointing out, with the ever-changing weather, a good way to hang is really important. So on my second design, I focused more on stability, and I had some of the silverware acting as braces between the top and the bottom to make sure it stayed together better. So Tasha had started thinking of her first design even before the materials were out, which is fantastic. I love it. Elise says that they've actually used hangers. That's awesome to hang feeders. Giselle's mentioning using the tray, bottle, and string for their feeder. Yeah, awesome. I think one of the things that you'll find as you do this with um, youth is that longevity piece is sometimes the harder one for them to wrap their heads around, and what materials they choose to use or don't use, and how they'll stand up, or whether the feeder will actually be stable when you lift it up and hang it. Awesome. Well, it looks like there's still some great ideas and examples of how to design coming in. I appreciate the most recent one saying that the first design was over budget, and then made a similar design to bring it into budget. So cool. Awesome. Thank you for playing along with me. I appreciate that. Okay. So then the next step after they've sketched out their designs and had some time to talk through and create a couple different designs would be time to build the feeder. It can be good to allow a pretty decent amount of time for this, 30 to 40 minutes to gather materials and build the feeders. I mean, you'll have some students going right up to the wire, and some who are done early, as always. This is a super fun part of the process, of course. We do have some safety tips for you as you are thinking about this. When we've done this, we find it's usually a really good idea to have specific stations for the hot glue and the scissors, and other cutting implements, and have that be elsewhere separated from where the kids are working, and have an adult supervising those. Um, Typically, when I do like a point system for the feeder materials, all of these connecting materials, duct tape, hot glue, those are all considered free. Those are just the things that make it work. So definitely consider having a safety station where you have your cutting implements and hot glue guns and an adult handy there. You can even demonstrate different ways that you want your students to approach using these materials. And then next is testing the feeder, putting it outside, filling it with that cup of seed, and seeing how they do over that week of time. So you want to make sure that you schedule some time for your students to actually get out there and observe the feeders. And there are some things you might want to have them track. There's an example potential um, data sheet pictured on the right here. So some things you might want to have them look at are the total number of bird visits to their feeder during their observation period, what number of species are visiting, how is their feeder doing in the weather, how much seed is eaten from the feeder. So if you want to look at how much seed is gone from each feeder, it's a good idea to measure the seed that goes into them. And you could do that with that 1 cup measure or weight, however you want to track that. And that's a good one for if you don't have a lot of time to get into bird ID with your students. That's a great way to measure how the feeders are being used. Of course, there's always the potential that wind or weather knocked seed out of feeders as well. So there's some potential discussion points there too. And then it's always great to have kids reflect on the process once it's complete. So at the end of the week, have each design team take a look at their feeder, discuss their observations. Some things you might want to have them consider are of the feeders out there, which feeders seem to attract the greatest bird diversity? Why do you think that is? Which design materials were the most sturdy, which fell apart? Ideas for improving future feeder designs, and then any questions that arise during the week and how can you explore the answers. So if you've ever taken kids outside or done activities like these before, you've probably noticed that curious questions always arise. So something you might want to consider doing is having a wonder wall, a place where you can put questions and gather questions that come up during the week to revisit. We talk more about that in the Students as Scientists resource, but it can be as simple as a spot on some chart paper where you can put post-it notes with ideas or a section of a whiteboard where kids can jot down questions, things like that. And then from reflection, there are some great ways to take this forward. So if you want to go even further, you can design and build a super feeder. So you could shuffle groups and have students work in the same group, or you could have them work in different groups, or you could even design as a class. And so as part of that reflection, you can ask those questions about what materials were the best, which feeders attracted the most, and start creating a design taking the best parts from every feeder and creating your super feeder, which is a really fun way to kind of synthesize all this learning. And you put the feeder out there and you can see how it does as well. So that provides a really awesome jumping off point into inquiry. So as we've talked about, let's take a moment and brainstorm. So I want you to imagine this scenario. You have your super feeder that you've designed and built with your class that takes the best features from all of the other feeders that you have already put out, and you're going to put it up against a store-bought feeder. What are some inquiry questions that you could think of that you could ask for this process? So you're comparing this super feeder you've designed and a store-bought feeder. What are some things you could ask um, and questions you could investigate? Michelle's saying you could look at the materials which that they're made of, so um, which last longer. Yeah. Tasha's bringing up cost effectiveness. Oh, does color impact which feeder is chosen? Yeah, so your super feeder might have some pretty wild colors going around versus the store-bought feeder. You could even do color on just a bunch of different design feeders. You could look at the common features between them. What kind each, what kinds of birds each one attracts. hmm Yeah, so there's some fun ideas coming in through the chat window. Here are some ones that we suggest in the guide that might be things that you could look into. As somebody said, which feeder attracts the most birds? Which feeder attracts the greatest diversity of birds? So, can more species use one feeder than the other? And from which feeder will more food be eaten? So again, this would be that measuring the seed that goes into and out of these feeders. Awesome. Well, thanks for playing along and brainstorming different aspects and designing a feeder with me. Um, just again, if you want to take on this guide, you find that there are some of these amazing curious questions coming up, or you love this idea of the super feeder, and you want to dive into some inquiry, remember that students as scientists can help. So again, available as a free download, these grade banded curricula, K5 and 612, will take you through the whole inquiry process. All right, let's take a look at some things that can help you make the most of your feeders once you've designed them. So some tips and tricks and resources from around the lab. So oftentimes when folks are getting into bird feeding, one of the questions they ask is, where should I hang my feeders? So there's actually some good research on this about how close to a window you should hang your feeders. So one of the concerns when we hang feeders are window collisions. Birds don't have a great track record with being able to perceive glass. They often think they can fly through it. So the safest collision zone is actually 1 meter or closer, um, or beyond 10 meters. So beyond 30 feet or, um, excuse me, ideally 5 meters or closer to your home. And part of that is um, that birds, when they get startled, they have to have some momentum when they're flying away from the feeders if they're actually going to hurt themselves flying into the window. So the closer they are, the less momentum they have, the less likely they are to hurt themselves. There's also other things that you can do to prevent window strikes if you're concerned about that and putting up feeders. There's like window decals and things that you can do. There's a website called 7 Simple Actions, which dives into some different ways that you can prevent window strikes. But yeah, just something to keep in mind when you're placing your feeders. Another question we often get is, what kind of seeds should I use? And thankfully, we have a tool to help you answer that. So you're seeing here a screenshot of our common feeder bird interactive, which goes through matching feeder and seed types to different types of birds. I'm going to try and navigate away from our slideshow for a moment. And hopefully you'll still be able to see my screen. So hopefully you are now seeing the Feeder Watch website. And if you go to this Learn tab, you'll come to the Common Feeder Bird Interactive. And that's going to open up this here. And then click View Bird List. And you're going to start to see a list of all the feeder birds. And then you have some options to filter here. So right now we're looking at the winter region for all, and food type all, and feeder type all. So if we were thinking about engineering feeders and what kind of seed we wanted to use, I would leave it on feeder type all. But then you can change your location. So now I've changed it to the northeast, and I'm going to change the seed type to black oil, excuse me, black oil sunflower. And now we can see all the type of birds that would be attracted to this feeder in the northeast with this type of seed. There are other types of seed. For example, cracked corn, you can see attracts fewer birds, fruit, even fewer birds than that. And then there's all sorts of different types of food you can look at. Um, a lot of seed mixes often have millet in them, so you can see that attracts fewer birds than some other things. But my recommendation for you is if you can only do one seed, black oil sunflower is the way to go. It attracts the largest number and variety of birds in our typically. Okay, so that's one cool resource for you as you are preparing for your feeder experiment. And I'm realizing that we are running low on time. So real quick, I'll just take us over to the bird cams because I did mention them as a great resource earlier. So if you don't have a feeder that you can observe with your students, when you're doing this, observing birds at the feeder section, you can always come to our Cornell Feeder Watch Cam on allaboutbirds.org/cams. You can click on it. You can see the cam live. Um, I'll hit play because sometimes there's something out there at night. But you can also rewind if there's no birds when you turn it on. Um, so I could, scroll back to some other time and you can see, oh, we've got a hairy and a downy. That's a nice comparison. And you can see the birds that were there then. Or if you scroll down a little bit further, there's often video highlights. And looks like they put up a new highlight recently because the one that I chose was just to the right of this one. So, but yeah, but that's what I did when I was preparing for the webinar. I chose a different highlight that was featured right here because I knew that there were going to be birds there. Like this looks like a great one to use because you've got several birds on different feeders. So just a great resource for you as you are preparing. And we're gonna just go ahead and skip ahead here and ask if you have any questions for us. Yeah, today was the last, no, wait, yesterday was the last day of the Great Backyard Bird Count. So if you did that, there are some fun ways that you can keep this going. For those of you who don't know, the Great Backyard Bird Count is a 4-day participatory science event that happens every February around President's Day weekend. All you have to do to participate is count birds for 15 minutes on one of those days and submit them through eBird. And then you have participated in the Great Backyard Bird Counts. So great way to do that with your feeders as well. Okay, so it looks like we have a question about bird feeders and that don't attract rodents or bears. This is a great thing. I'm really glad you brought this up. There are going to be some areas in the country where you are not going to be able to have bird feeders out during particular times of the year. So if you know you have black bears in your area, you're going to want to check your town regulations on bird feeders. Usually I think is it your Department of Natural Resources will have something to say about that. Um, there's really no magic feeder that is going to spare you either the rodents or the bears. But there are some things that you can do to deter rodents. So one of the things that you can do is rake under your feeders periodically to help get rid of the seed buildup. And that will help with deterring things like rats and mice. Um, but yeah, sometimes you'll need to have a conversation with your maintenance folks, make sure they're on board for that aspect of it, because there will be debris underneath there. There's always potential that you could hang like a tray feeder underneath some other feeders to help catch the spillover. I've had some people do that and say that works for them. All right. We've got a couple more minutes, so we'll hang out if there are more questions. But in case people start ducking out because it's almost 8, I want to say thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. Really appreciate having you all here. I hope you get to the opportunity to build some feeders with your students and put them out there. Send us pictures. Add us on social media or something because I would love to see the creative ideas that your students come up with. And so, yeah, keep in touch. If you would like a letter for participating in this webinar for one contact hour, you can email us at k12lab@cornell.edu and we can send you one. And we hope that we will see you in a future webinar. Next month, we are talking about nature journaling. Erin, I typically don't send the PowerPoint because I don't always have permission to share in the photos in that way, but the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so you'll always be able to refer back to it there. Awesome. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great night. Appreciate you coming. Take care.